Welcome to Positive Philter with your host, Philip Wilkerson, a podcast that focuses on friends, family, health, and career, with a little self-help along the way. Please join me in this journey for self-improvement, and I hope what I have to share will make you a better person, thus making the world a better place. I hope you enjoy the show. I hope you enjoy the show. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, and people. It's Philip Wilkerson back with another episode of Positive Philter. I'm joined by a special guest. Well, everyone's a special guest to me, but I am joined by world-renowned DEI specialist, Miss Jennifer Brown, and I see her name, DEI advocate. I'll be totally remiss. I was made this connection through Amy Louise. She said, I have someone that needs to be on your podcast. I said, who is it? She said it was Miss Jennifer Brown. I said, am I supposed to know who that is? And she said, yes. And then I realized that, I need to do a little bit more research. And I did. And I did a lot of preparation before the show because I was like, wow, she has a phenomenal body of work, especially as it relates to, groups and inclusion and all those different things. And I was like, wow, this is really something I'm super excited about. I'm super excited to have this conversation. So before we get into it, Jennifer, can you just give the listeners a little elevator pitch of who you are?
Sure, Phil, thanks. Thanks for having me. So I've been in this space nearly 20 years, amazingly. Before DEI was, a twinkle in anybody's eye, and certainly before it was taken seriously, I think, in a more broad way, like it's happening now. But I've had the firm, which is Jennifer Brown Consulting, for that time, and we've grown over the years. Obviously, the team has increased in size, and today we consult on DEI strategy and also provide learning programs, both live and online, for mainly corporate leaders. So we build DEI strategies for big companies and medium-sized companies, and increasingly smaller companies as well, though that was never true, again, until recent times. And then I'm an author of 3 or 4 books at this point, with more on the way. And I'm a keynoter. I love to speak on this topic, particularly for leadership teams. And I have my own podcast also called The Will to Change.
I love it. And so one thing I did is when you go down the YouTube rabbit holes, I loved your actual personal story, where you said, I don't think a lot of people, when they look at me, associate me as a DEI specialist, especially certain identities are hidden. And you talked about your upbringing. So can you share a little bit about that? Like your parents and how you grew up? Because I found that super fascinating for how you got into this work.
Yeah, thank you. It's, getting into DEI work is a winding and unpredictable career path. Like literally there's not a lot of degrees you can get in it unless you design it yourself, kind of thing. But it's a wonderful field because I think it can hold a lot of different identities and also backgrounds, because we each bring something, whether you used to be a lawyer, whether you used to be a salesperson, whether you were a nonprofit person, whether you were an artist in my case. So I was an opera singer, and I came to New York to make it and ran into vocal trouble and had to get several surgeries on my voice and was quite literally silenced. And had to build it back, and then realized that I wouldn't ever be able to make my living using the instrument that I have. And it was heartbreaking, but through necessity, it opened another door to try to figure out, so how can I use my voice then in the world? Like, what's my contribution going to be? And some friends said, you're good on stage. Like, you're very comfortable there. Why don't you become a trainer, like a leadership trainer? And I didn't know what that was and what it meant. And I didn't know this whole field of organizational development, if you will, existed. And I ended up getting another degree after my music degree in that, and sort of felt like I had traded one stage for another. And now I was on the stage talking about leadership to adult learners in the leadership sort of organizational setting. And it just felt like a revelation. I mean, I loved it. It felt very about human motivation. It felt very like the human side of business. It felt like something I could really contribute to. And I really enjoyed the performance aspect of being in rooms, virtual or real, physical rooms, where we can take these things apart and talk about leadership, like what does good leadership look like? What does inclusive leadership look like? So anyway, I've pivoted away from music, but I never really lost my love of performance and all that the arts taught me, which is just deep and wide, and it prepared me for what I do today so beautifully. So, and now, of course, we focus on giving voice to the voiceless in the organization. So the meaning of why I think I was deprived of something I thought I wanted was a redirection. It was meant to redirect me, I think, away from being the singer, but using my voice in a different way, and studying, who has voice in organizations and who's not heard, who feels afraid to use their voice. Why do we need voices in the organization? And how can I be a voice now with the platform that I've built to bring that to the fore? I think that's what I was meant to do. So all of these things kind of redirected me. And at the time, you never understand why it's happening for you. You think it's happening to you, but it was happening for me. And I just am so proud. And the other thing, Phil, I want to point out, I'm a member of the LGBTQ plus community. So when you said, I do walk on stage and people kind of roll their eyes, or I don't even know what's going through their heads. And I acknowledge it. And I say, look, I'm a white woman. I'm cisgender. My pronouns are she, her. But I am in the LGBTQ plus community. I've had a partner for 25 years, Michelle. And that's an invisible aspect of my diversity story, that how many other invisible diversity stories are we missing about ourselves and also about our coworkers? And that is so foundational to what I teach and how I teach it, because it just calls people in that moment to say, wow, I may have been wrong about her. What else am I wrong about? And how else am I making assumptions and letting my biases guide me about how we all can use our voice as messengers for this work? And I really believe that, because the work is massive. So I don't think we can discount or count out any voices of any identity, given that we all need to build what's next together.
I love it. And I had like 3 different questions pop in my head. I'm trying to work on that word, like active listening, like listen in the moment and then think of your next
and
question.
Then poof.
Yeah, but I'm definitely, podcasting has really challenged me to use my active listening skills before to think of a question. But so I'm going to share a definition of what I think DEI means. A very rough, this is my understanding. You can pick it apart. You can identify what you agree with, or just give me some feedback, because as I said, this podcast is for my learning. So this is just the Philip Wilkerson, how I conceptualize it, is that for me, diversity, equity, inclusion, diversity is the different people at the table. Mm-hmm. If we had this invisible table, whatever, or metaphoric table. Equity means that everyone has an equal viewpoint at the table. Like the chairs are equal. Like when we're at this table, we can all sit. Someone's not lower than higher. I'm envisioning a round table where like we could see each other. And then inclusion means like when we sit at this table, when I talk, my voice is heard, this person. And so when I think of this metaphoric table, we've seen times where it's not diverse. Like when I come up to this table, no one it's all homogenous, right? Mm-hmm. Or I see this part where it's not equitable, where like my seat is different than someone else's. And then I've seen times or systems where like, yeah, there's a lot of different types of people at this table. Yeah, we all got the same seat, I can view things, but as you said, that voiceless, like, but I'm muted in this person and I don't feel like I belong. So I just kind of threw that out there. What would you identify with that, or what would you, for that really random definition I just came up with, what would you add or make note of for those that were very curious about DEI?
Right. I think your definitions were awesome. They're great. I mean, we say diversity is the who, it's the mix that you gather or don't around the table, both visible and invisible, right? So we have to make sure we're disciplined about that. And that's actually in some ways harder to perceive. And then you said, let me get to equity in a second. But inclusion then is the how. How is that diversity galvanized? Do I feel that I have the psychological safety to use my voice? If I use my voice, will I be heard? Will my expertise, both like my learned expertise and my lived experience, right, which is that who we are, both of those kinds of expertise, will that be valued? Will that be listened to and acted upon, which is really an important kind of asterisk. Like, it's one thing to open the floor and listen, but it's another thing to act on what you hear. So, and then equity is, like you said, like, am I on a seat? Like, am I pulled up to the table, or am I in the back row, or I'm not able to see over the table? Like, it's the foundation we stand on. And is that, has that been, if it's unequal, has that been addressed in the systems perspective? So the equity lens looks at difference and acknowledges that differences exist, and then accounts for those differences in the strategy. Meaning, it's kind of, I like to oppose it to equality. Equality is a goal. But the problem with an equality strategy is it comes from that place of, I don't see color, for example. So it's almost like, I want to treat everybody the same and assume that we will rise to the same point. But the problem with that strategy is, we know that we're all starting from different places, and that we need to be, historically, we have not been heard or not been represented, right? So if we treat everybody the same, it's not going to account for those differences. So equity accounts for the differences. Pay gap is a great example. So if I don't want to see that there's a pay gap in my org, I believe, oh, I'm sure everybody's paid equally. I mean, why wouldn't they be? Like, that, I believe in equality. Equity says, okay, well, let's look at the data. Oh my goodness. All of a sudden you see 20 percentage points difference. So the equity lens then says, okay, I'm going to look for this. I'm going to own it. I'm going to call it out. I'm going to act on it. I'm going to fix it. Equity is a systems fix. It is literally that piece of, it's a commitment. It's a big commitment, by the way, because, looking at systems that were not built to be equitable, is, most of the workplace was not built by and for and to work for most of us, many of us. So we're dealing with this antiquated system that has never really seen us or included us, right? We were not at that table. And if we weren't heard, to your point about the difference between being at the table and being heard at the table. So I hope that helps. And then I would add the B, which is belonging. And I think that's where a lot of strategies are focusing too, is, I feel like if all these pieces are there, we achieve belonging. Belonging is a feeling. It's a result of having done the D and the I and the E well. That I feel seen and heard, that I feel that I have a fair shake, right? That I have an equitable playing field, that I'm being supported and resourced, and that my differences are seen, acknowledged, and celebrated. So belonging is a wonderful goal of doing this work, and checking in then on employee engagement surveys, or however we collect data from our workforce, to say, do you feel that you belong here? Why or why not? Do you, and digging in a little bit on identity and saying, so as a XYZ, how do you feel you're supported here? And that's where, like, a team like mine comes in and does the organizational analysis. That's what we're looking for. We're looking for discrepancies in belonging when we ask the same exact question across identity groups and we get very different answers back. That tells us a whole lot about where we need to apply some strategies and changes and fixes and support, so that we can, get that same answer across the board, which I don't think is ever going to happen in my lifetime, Philip.
No, I was about to say that really struck a chord with me, because, I've been in spaces where, like, yeah, man, they give me a good paycheck. I'm eating, I got food on the table. Definitely, I see other, Black and brown people, so I'm not the only person. But that sense, that innate feeling, is still sometimes not there. And that's not a good feeling. Like, wow, like I trade my salary or trade that for more of a sense of belonging, because that really hits the core. And so I would say, just a question, like, you laid it out and you said the whole system one. Obviously, you can't weigh one or the other, but which was, I guess, for organizations, which one is the most difficult to enact? Because I'm saying, from my point of view, when you went on more, talked about equity the most, I feel like that'd be the most, like, that's not the quick fix one, as opposed to the others.
Oh, they're all hard or easy. I mean, I guess it depends on who you talk to. I mean, you have to be, to your point, I think you have to be careful about which you measure, or measuring one without the other. So the diversity metrics traditionally was where this whole conversation started decades ago, was in certain companies where it was like counting the heads, right? And it was forced because of legal issues and affirmative action reporting, and it focused on race and gender. And now there's way broader diversity dimensions, that some of which are really difficult for us to track, like disability, like LGBTQ plus, because a lot of us are still hiding and unwilling to check the box about how we identify because of organizational trust or lack thereof. To your point about belonging, right? Like, how much are you going to disclose to your employer when you don't fundamentally feel like they've got your back? But getting that diversity, I mean, talk to anyone in certain parts of the world or even the US, like getting certain kinds of diversity depending on your region is difficult, like because of who lives locally. And, now it's changed because we can recruit from the world, basically, which is such a gift for the D part of the diversity equation. So we can set those metrics and get that talent in, but then can we keep them? And that's where then inclusion becomes really critical. It's like, what's the point of get them in if you can't keep people because the culture is experienced as toxic? And so measuring inclusion is trickier because it's not measuring the heads, it's really measuring performance by leaders and managers. So that can be built into performance reviews. It can be, like I said, engagement surveys where you can look at the data by leader, like by function. And you can also look at that, and that tells you a big story about like which divisions, if you will, kind of are not being experienced as inclusionary, if you will. But measuring inclusion then has to go along with D. Like, one without the other is an incomplete picture. They're just different. I'm not sure they're either one is more difficult than the other. Equity work is also difficult because I think it's the most complex, because it requires us to look at the systems that we, like the water that we swim in every day, and be critical of those systems and look critically at them from the lens of, where is this recruitment process biased, for example. Like, let's take it apart. Let's look at our job descriptions. Let's look at our candidate sourcing protocols. Let's look at our interviewer slates. There's pieces to each system and each process and policy where there's improvement needed, or maybe we need to like take the whole thing down and rebuild, depending on like what we discover. So the equity work requires, I think, a lot of courage, because it's people view it probably as kind of questioning the foundation of how we operate. And yet that's precisely what we need to do, because we have to change the bones of the organization. Like, it's not just cosmetic stuff. We have to actually, do what we say we're going to do. We got to support talent to, thrive for a very long time with us, hopefully, moving through their careers. We want them to stay. But if each policy and process that they encounter has not been revisited and redesigned with equity in mind, like ever, or maybe not for a long time, there's going to continue to be these sort of microaggressions or macroaggressions that happen to talent that drive them out of the organization. So leaders have to have like all of these hats on. And I know it sounds like a lot. I know that if people complain all the time, but I'm like, well, you know what? This is what playing catch up feels like, because we have been ringing the bell for so long about this. It's not like it just became a problem yesterday or with the murder of George Floyd. This is something we've known about. But organizations are notoriously good at kicking the can, notoriously good at being like short-term thinkers, and also measured in terms of their financial report performance quarter over quarter. So what I'm talking about, what you and I are passionate about, is the long game. This is pivoting organizations, which are like ocean liners. They don't turn very easily. Pivoting them for the future. It's fundamental work, but we're just really behind. And so we're playing catch up, and it can be overwhelming, but it's all work that has had to be done for a really long time. And I think we haven't had the moral courage, and we haven't made it a priority. And I guess we haven't felt the pain. And so I wonder whether organizations now are feeling the pain. I wonder if leaders are like, whoa, I don't know how to lead in this new world. I need to go learn this. I need to read these books. I need to start paying attention and not leave it to the D&I team to manage this. I need to take this on. And I think we're in that moment. I mean, might just be wishful thinking, but that's what gets me up in the morning.
No, well, one, you're not wishful thinking at all. I think that you are totally transparent or totally nailed it with, the exacerbation of like news going on where it's like, oh, now this is a problem. I told people, like, I'm just curious, as specifically as a Black male, it's like, is all these places just catching the wave now because
Right.
it's popularized? Is it performative, or is this really systemic, like you said? And I love that you brought into the leadership aspect, which is probably the main point. I really love leadership. When I say love it, I love to study it. I love reading different books. I love listening to different podcasts and leadership. For me, as I like to say, a developing and growing leader, I love to learn that, wow, like my misconceptions and myths of a leader have changed over time. So I've been very transparent, like that I'm the son of a military man. And, I thought leadership was this one way, very authoritative and da 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 da. And then I started learning different wows. I was like, wow, I could be a leader in my own style. So, and also like I studied like different types. Like for one, I did a positive leadership certificate at Mason, and they learned about like how you infuse kindness and compassion and mindfulness into leadership. Because at the end of the day, if you put all those things, you retain people and all that. But I want to branch off and say, as a different style or different, I don't know, not niche, how did inclusive leadership really come to be for you? Like I need to like, you've been a leadership trainer and all that. How do I know, like, I need to document or train people specifically to be an inclusive leader as well as a positive leader and all that? So, or strategic leader, like,
Right.
it's very easy. Like we can be strategic leaders. Like these are goals and we hit the goals and there's a whole pocket of the fight, all these habits and all those things that's strategic. And then there's like the foo-foo, what I'm talking about, the feel-good.
Yeah.
Like, this needs to be something that we need to discuss. We need to talk about inclusive leadership. And this is, you want to be an effective leader, you need to practice the things that we're going to talk about some in your book. So
That's
how
right.
did that branch out? How did that come to be?
Yeah, well, you're right. And I like you have been a studier of leadership for a long time and puzzled through why I didn't feel led by leaders that I resonated with, which is probably your experience too, that it felt like measuring performance, quote unquote, it was like this narrowly defined exercise that didn't account for what would generate that belonging that actually leads to greater performance. And so the dots I try to connect with leaders that think this is beside the point, that think this is woo-woo, that think it's soft skills, right? All those ways that we degrade the very important critical competencies of empathy, transparency, compassion, flexibility, agility, emotional intelligence, all those things, they've been around the edges and they haven't been codified into our organizational structures, and we haven't trained on them and we haven't measured them. We haven't supported leaders and held them accountable to demonstrate these things. And I also think maybe leaders would say, "Oh, I'm really empathetic. I'm really compassionate." So I think we also struggle with this tendency we have as humans to overrate our competency. Some of us overrate ourselves and some of us underrate
I
ourselves.
was
But
going to say, I underrate.
so do I.
Yeah, I was like, I
It's
don't know.
others that shall remain nameless who think they're great at everything.
Yeah.
So got to kind of level set that a little bit and say, you're right that we have to fundamentally change the way we define leadership, good leadership, and inclusive leadership is good leadership, right? It is what particularly younger talent that's coming into the organization really resonates with. It's what we want to see in our leaders and I'm Gen X, what we always wanted to see it. It just wasn't there and it wasn't safe to be that kind of leader. I mean, honestly, it wasn't, because it wasn't measured that way. It wasn't compensated. It wasn't encouraged. It wasn't supported. And in fact, I think asking those questions probably made you a bit of an outcast in systems that don't really see people. Like the workplace has not wanted to see the full person, like forever. I mean, bring your full self to work is all fine and dandy and sounds great, but nothing was supporting you to really do that. Like we can say it as a marketing slogan, but you try to do that and you're penalized. And that goes for leaders too, because I believe actually leaders have had to, and if they are of the white, straight male variety, there's still diversity within that group of people, and yet there was a conformity to a norm that was expected there too, right? So this is not, I don't subscribe to different genders being different kinds of, it's a whole rabbit hole that people can debate forever. But I do think that inclusive leadership, we need to celebrate it and role model it and normalize it. So to me, that means we need to drive it through the systems of an organization. We need to train on it, support it, hold it accountable, define it, show it in practice, show it, when it's being done well, use exemplary leaders who are inclusive leaders as examples to follow and to mimic, because people mimic leaders. I mean, we look to leaders to understand, to make meaning out of what we're experiencing, the markets, our products, our place, our purpose as an organization. Leaders are so important, and they cast a really long shadow, and they have everything to do with organizational culture. So that's why I tend to like to focus on the top, because I feel like if I can impact those folks, then they impact turning around thousands of people. It's the most efficient way, most direct way I can kind of enter the system and push and encourage and create aha moments and kind of get people on a different path. And even digging within themselves to say, where is my empathetic leadership? What does compassion mean to me in the workplace? Like, what do I not yet know or understand about this whole DEI thing? I think leaders have awoken to this, but they are very unprepared. They may care a lot, but they may not know what to do. And if they don't care, maybe the caring will be birthed, right, over time. But sometimes you have to meet people where they're at, and they're at different places, right? They have different attitudes and assumptions about this work. They have positive or negative or a blend of, beliefs about, why are we going after this? Does it mean less for me, is like a classic example of what I hear. Whether that's articulated or not, I know that it is being thought. And so at some point you have to understand, like, what is my audience thinking? They don't even need to tell me. I know. I mean, those of us who do this work, we know. It's sort of like an FAQs of resistance and denial and deflection of responsibility and all that stuff. Like, people just don't want to. It's like people have outsourced this for a really long time. And yet what's so beautiful about the work is actually the transformation that's available for leaders when they start to learn and study it, is to be transformed. It's to evolve, I think, as not just a leader in an organization, but a human, a parent, a community member. It's once you sort of wake up and say, oh, I have power. I can influence things. I can use my voice and be very proud of, like, whatever legacy I might create. I can be the leader, the kind of leader that people want to work with and for, because I'm inclusive. I think about these things. I ask about them. I check in on them. I take accountability for them. That's the kind of leader we all want to be colleagues with. We want to work for. And so I try to explain all this to say, like, to leaders, like, get on board. This shouldn't be a chore. It's actually a huge opportunity to grow and to embrace this moment and all future moments, and successfully evolve to meet that moment and resonate with others and get the most out of that potential that's all around us all the time. And I don't know if there's any leader that doesn't care about that, and any leader that's sitting here in this chaotic world and saying, how do I support my people so that they feel they can be productive, so that they feel energized and want to give that extra effort, so that they'll stay and grow? That's good people leadership, right? But it has so much to do with inclusion, and that's that missing piece. We can't force people to perform. Performance is an invitation, and I think it's born from feeling seen and heard and valued, and that's what I want to give. That's when I do my best and most creative thinking, and when I can show up with the most generosity is if I feel that my needs are being met, right? So to me, this is just so obvious, but workplace, it hasn't had a lot of humanity. It hasn't been a priority. So I think, again, we're playing catch up, but I hope someday this is all very intuitive. And we look back at this time and say, We had to figure this out. We were forced to figure it out, but now I really understand it. I'm not being forced to do this. I believe this is something that is good for the world, for my business, for me as a person, for everybody in my orbit. That's where I want leaders to get to.
I love it. And, I'm giving you a lot of nonverbals because I'm vibing with what you're saying. I'm buying what you're selling because, just at the very root of it from personal experience, I've thrived when someone saw me. And, like you just nailed it. Like you'll run through a brick wall for someone that you believe got your best heart. Like after a while, as a system, you start holding yourself accountable. Like I can't let this person down because they believe in me and all this stuff, and that gives you a drive. And you work harder, and they don't even have to tell you to work harder because you're right. Like, I'm going to hold myself accountable. That's One thing I really liked is that you broke it down into 4 phases of this journey. I think unaware, aware, somewhere in the middle, and then advocate. I'm sorry,
active is the third. Yeah.
Okay. And so can you break it down? Like how, like people love systems and people love, you gave me phases. How did you come up with this 4 different levels? and just, because I thought I drew to that because I've seen that in myself, wow, I didn't really think of this. Oh, now I know this, all these things. So can you break down those levels of inclusive leadership, those 4 different phases?
Just like every other plan that we make for ourselves, we're on a journey of accomplishing something, right? We think about our fitness, we think about our health, we think about saving for retirement, our milestones, right? So as learners of inclusive leadership, I thought to myself, so what if I had to put people into buckets on a learning curve, what would those buckets be? And for all of you who are listening, Phil is referencing the model that's in How to Be an Inclusive Leader, which is my second book. And so it just felt to me like I wanted people to locate where they are because you can't take the right next step if you don't know where you are. And it's also important to be realistic and honest about where you are and objective, as hard as that is, and not overrate ourselves, right? To really be honest about what we don't yet know and what our competency is. So the 4 phases you just articulated felt to me like the truest, right? Which is we go from being unaware, which is what I also might call unconscious incompetence, meaning I don't know what I don't know. And there's a lot of reasons people are in unaware.
And I'm gonna jump in real quick. Is like sometimes that ignorance thing though, like I'm thinking about the unawareness in the matrix, you know what I'm saying? Like, do you want to take the pill? And you're like, I'm good, I'm plugged in. But then when you take it, it could be very hard to be like, oh my goodness, that was some bliss and unconscious. Like now that I know it, wow, these people have been treated wrong. You start feeling guilt. For those that are white, you might start seeing white guilt. I don't think, some people don't want to get out of that phase at all. That could be very scary. But that was my little interjection about unawareness. Like sometimes it feels good.
No, you're like teaching.
I'm good. I'm glad I don't know this.
You're like literally teaching the model. I mean, it's what you just said. It's like I want to stay comfortable. I want to deal with a world that's familiar to me. I want to. I don't want to be. I'm afraid of what I'm going to feel if I open up this Pandora's box, and then I'm afraid I'm not going to. Well, there's going to be less for me. That could be something that's occurring to leaders. Or folks, and what is my accountability then for what I learned to be true, and how did I participate, or how was I complicit, or how did I look the other way, or how did I remain silent? Yeah, so this has all happened, and I think what you're talking about is the transition between then unaware and aware. So then now in aware, which is phase 2, it's I know what I don't know, and this is called conscious incompetence. I'm aware of what I don't know how to do. And in aware, it's okay, now I have to learn. I have to sort of really get on this steep learning curve, like absorb a lot of information that I've either never really looked at or known about or paid attention to, and that to me is about the lived experience of others. It's about my own diversity story. What are the things that I've buried really deep in myself that I've never articulated or talked about, that I might have shame around? I might be covering that. I mean, for LGBTQ people, we've dealt with the closet our whole lives. So, in aware, it may be an awakening to our own story of what has been the cost of that. Or I'm not out yet to customers. I mean, there's a lot of people that are still not out. I mean, they're lying about their entire life. to certain parts of their professional world or all of their professional world. I mean, you'd be surprised. Nearly half of us are still closeted in the workplace. So, in Aware, we're grappling with the truth. And then who knows the truth? And for those of us who are just awakening in the last couple of years to sort of the inequities in our system, it can be guilt inducing for sure, shame inducing. It can freeze us because we're so perhaps overwhelmed that we are not sure. I mean, shame and guilt are like a deep well that it's hard to really, like, once you go into them, like, it's hard to get out of them. And it's hard to take action from a place of feeling incompetent and like a bad person, which is what shame tells you, right? Shame tells you you're a bad person. Guilt tells you a different thing, which is I did a bad thing or I did something that I regret. That's guilt. But shame is I'm a bad person intrinsically. So we want to be really careful in ourselves, thinking about our own response to being challenged in these ways and not make it all about us. The purpose of this is to keep moving on the journey. And but to take the appropriate measure of guilt, the appropriate measure of accountability. But most important, to move into phase 3, this third stage, which is active, which is okay, now that I was in aware, which is conscious incompetence, right? Now I know what I don't know. Now I've been studying, I've been watching and learning and listening to podcasts and, putting myself into places where I'm the only, and, understanding, what does the world feel like as for people of another identity walking through that world. Now the question is, phase 3 is like, what am I going to do with it? How am I going to start to modify my language? How am I going to start having different conversations? How am I going to begin to advocate for equity in my organization and point things out? And activating around that knowledge is conscious competence. So if you liken this conscious competence thing I've been talking about to like riding a bike, conscious competence phase 3 is like, okay, I'm handing on the handlebars like really tight and I'm trying not to fall off, but I'm going to fall off and I'm going to get back on. I'm going to fall off. I'm going to get back on. Right. So you see people super awkward. Like I'm trying to use a new language. I'm trying to like pay attention to things. I'm trying to say something. I'm trying to interrupt something. I want to give feedback to somebody. I want to be an ally, so you can feel it's like the duck on this, the surface of the water and the feet under are just like paddling furiously because we don't yet have the competence. We can't ride the bike and talk on the phone yet. We just, we're just every single moment we're sort of just trying to stay on. So, I think that's where a lot of people are is exercising that new muscle. And it's fraught because it's so easy to be critical of people as they fall off the bike. And I just would encourage all of us to support the learning of others because we are the learners too. And not a single one of us can ever be on our high horse about why don't you know this? We just can't. It is what it is. We have to deal with people where they're at. And if they've missed, giant swaths of human experience because they grew up in a bubble, I mean, I could say that was me. Up until I came out, I had no idea about marginalized communities and identities that incite violence and aren't protected on basic, human rights. Like I had no idea. All I knew was I fell in love with somebody and I decided to honor that. And I stepped out of a world of privilege into this world that I had to then make sense of and figure out and then after that, I realized this isn't the only identity. I need to become a student of others and make sure that I'm the ally. At the same time, I'm LGBTQ. I also need to be stepping forward and being in solidarity, based on all the other parts of my identity. So in active, we're practicing and it's awkward and it's hard. And it was so important to be resilient and be flexible and bend, not break, to take the right stuff and not get, too buried down in the, woe is me, poor me, or I can't get anything right, or I need to be perfect, or, we need to kind of put that stuff to the side and focus on the learning journey if we can. And then the fourth phase is advocate, which is kind of aspirational, which is advocate level behavior is I'm a pro. I mean, I've studied it forever. I know how to use my voice. I know how to challenge people. I don't get afraid. I'm bold. I'm courageous. I'm fearless. I'm not, I don't wait for permission. And, people who are advocate level are just, they're agitators in the system for change, and they're using everything they can, every part of who they are, which is, by the way, often our privileged parts of who we are the tools that we can most quickly activate, for change. And so as you progress through this journey, you start to realize how much you can actually do, that privilege isn't something to be hidden or not talked about or acted upon. It's actually, is the essence of power. And so if you can utilize that to make sure power is shared, make sure that equity is being created, that is a role that is available to all of us. I mean, Phil, you have male privilege, right? So I'm sitting here and I would challenge you. I'd say, so how are you using your male privilege today, right?
Yeah, or I was about to like literally say, like, I'm already thinking of like weaponizing your privilege. Like, I've had a certain social economic upbringing, military parents, so I have access to resources that I can, like I can't marginalize. Like I got to go to college and all that stuff, so I have that access.
Yeah.
Also, particularly within, was it homonormative or whatever? I'm just saying, like,
Heteronormative.
I have brothers that are in my fraternity that are LGBTQ, and I have the advocacy to speak up, as a cisgender male. So yeah, I do get that, like weaponizing my privileges, and I say
in a
weaponizing
good way.
yeah,
I like that.
way.
Yeah.
And like it's almost like that guy like that got in the movie theater before everybody, which I did in high school, and kicking the door open a little bit so that everyone else can get in the movie for free. Like opening the door, the back door. I've done that.
So like, propping it open. Come on in.
Yeah, come on in. And then don't tell me we don't watch the movie. I did not do that, but I did. Shout out to so we can go on, but I want to respect your time. I want to ask one more question, and then I'm going to hit you with one. But the last question as it relates to this inclusive leadership is that when you go through the 4 phases, for me, and this is just me, I feel like it's not linear because like I feel like, dang, there's gonna be a new group or a new identity, and I'm going back to square one of being unaware. Is that kind of your thought too? Like this is like I could be an advocate for my, as I said, gay brothers, but as you said, am I speaking up for the women at work or a different identity or those the invisible? Like, oh wow, I know there's more people that now suffer in silence with mental health. These identities that will just keep on popping up, and then I got to go back to number one. Is that true, or is that?
That is true. You're doing so good. You should like teach this.
I try to learn.
Intuitive to you, but no, it's a point I make always, which is that it's not linear. I built it to be a circular shape, and I was trying to capture the front and the forward and back and in between and everything. That even somebody who does this for a living, like I do, there are identities that I am really just coming out of unaware into aware about. Because I don't carry them and I don't have loved ones that are, in my close circle that are experiencing it. It's a bit more of a learning journey I have to intentionally go on. I have to choose and make the time to do it because I'm not just naturally exposed to it, So I haven't had a person in my life, for example, that struggles with mental health. And so my learning has to just look different. It doesn't mean it's harder. It just needs to be, I think, more intentional. And so we do this exercise where I list 12 identities from race, gender, sexual orientation, gender identity, socioeconomic background, disability, veteran status, age. And I list this and I ask people to take this poll, like, where am I on each of these? And that's a helpful way to calibrate what do I want to focus on? And where do I need to, what am I more comfortable advocating around because I have a deeper understanding of it and I have courage around it. Like I know how to use my voice and I know what's going to happen. I mean, and where am I just in that, conscious incompetence, which is, it's creaky and awkward. And I'm trying to, for example, share my pronouns as often as I can, but I'm a cisgender woman, meaning that I have never had to wrestle with a disconnect between the gender of the body I was born in and my sense of my gender or how I want to express my gender. So my life is not complicated by that. And I walk around the world, therefore, safer. Like putting much, much, much less energy towards my safety and all the other things. But I still am practicing saying she, her pronouns. Like I'm still practicing making sure I include it in my intro. So I would put myself somewhere in the middle. And that's those are trans and non-binary people who are in my community of identity. So we actually have to apply this to ourselves. We can't let ourselves off the hook and say, oh, I'm diverse. Like, check the box. I know everything about people of color. I know everything about women. No, like I do a lot of like study women's experience, right? But how much do I know about Black women's experience versus white women's experience, right? So we're getting to this point where we have the data and the information to study the specific experience of people and their intersectionality and account for those differences that layer on themselves. So it's important that those of us, even who are passionate about this, you probably are, if you're listening to this podcast, you're challenging yourself to even look at your own community of identity and say, where are we homophobic? Where is there sexism? Where are there socioeconomic challenges? How do we talk about people with disabilities within our community of identity? And so it's sort of horizontal and vertical. Phil, I lost you there. Are you still there?
So, this commercial break is brought to you by Positive Philter. Yes, myself, because I have no sponsors. So, if you really enjoy listening to this podcast, please consider leaving a review on iTunes or Stitcher. Every review helps spread the message of this podcast to other people. And if you have a favorite episode, please reshare that episode randomly on your Facebook wall or through your Instagram stories. The more and more people share these episodes and get them out to other listeners, the better this podcast will do. So, back to your regular scheduled episode.
There you
go. We're back, and then we're still recording. So we'll have a quick commercial break, but we're back. So as you said earlier, you were talking about the last identity and how it's cyclical.
Yeah, cyclical. We return to, we need to just make a plan. I don't think that there's any right answer. And if I had to score anybody, sometimes people like to know how they're doing. And, I don't know if it's about that. I think it's committing to even just one focus area of identity that is not your lived experience and becoming a student of it. But ultimately, it is about collecting enough knowledge, particularly for leaders, enough knowledge about the cultural experience of multiple communities so that you can customize your leadership based on the homework that you've done about certain communities. Like, that's really important. And, so if there's an ERG, employee resource group at your company, and you're listening to this, those are places where there are employee groups that are by affinity, and you can go and listen and learn and just witness people's stories and people's experiences. Like, that's how we broaden our perception of how the same system can be experienced so differently by different people based on their identity. And that's the job of every leader. I mean, that's cultural competence. When we throw that word around, that's what that means. It means that you've learned enough to know that for an LGBTQ person, for example, they may or may not be closeted or really out about their personal life. And to be sensitive, to ignore that would be to miss an opportunity for somebody to grow and for you to grow with them. And also to deepen your relationship and the authenticity of your relationship. So we have to know these things because these people sitting across from us are these, multifaceted beings. And, our deepest want is to be seen and acknowledged and named. And if a manager and a leader can figure out how to do that, like you said, you will get people who are willing to run through brick walls for you. I think that's a beautiful image. Like, who am I going to want to bring my best for and with? And that matters to companies' bottom line. Trust me, even if they don't see it, it does. So, let's fix it.
I totally get it because I'm saying, like, you think about all the sports stories, you think about all these journeys, you think about like how people recall the best leaders, and they talk about, I'll do anything for that guy. I was like, this coach empowered me and changed my life, and I'm catching rebounds and like they're just going all out in games, and you realize it's because that leader empowered that person individually and really saw them. So I joked with you and I said that the only part that was organized was shout outs and plugs, but this is my last part. It's called shot for shot, meaning you get to ask any random question. I get to ask you any random question. You want to go first or I go first?
You go first.
Okay, so you're an opera singer, as you said, in your voice, and now this work is like your platform. When was it when you were doing your leadership training where it literally felt like you were on the first time, or one of your earliest times where it felt like, wow, I'm on stage, I'm not performing in a bad way, but like I got a captive audience. This is making me feel like I did when I was on the stage singing. When was that moment for you?
I think it was in grad school for organizational development when I got to do my first little baby consulting assignment for my practicum. And I got to work with a leader of a nonprofit I was involved in as my special project, and got to interview her team and then deliver the results and coach her a little bit and present my findings to the class. And I just felt so comfortable in the role. It was so interesting. I never get nervous in front of groups. I just enjoy like the collaboration that happens, even though you're the speaker. There's an energetic exchange that is, it fills me up and energizes me, and I learn so much from the audience all the time. Every audience I'm still with, I'm it's almost like we're dancing together, we're creating together, we're learning together. Their challenge, if they challenge me, I love it, because it adds something to my arsenal. So I do feel, as a super duper extrovert also, that my I know we're like the same. I can see your face. We enjoy, throw me in, coach. Speaking of athletics, like I always just wanted to get thrown in, and figure it out, and make and create it together. And not knowing where it was going to go has never scared me. And I love a challenge. I love puzzling through in front of a group and with a group. Like, why is this not making sense? How can I help this connect? It's just, it requires all parts of my brain and capabilities. And sometimes, you'll walk out of a situation or a training and you'll feel it. You notice you're sweating, and, you're like, whew, that was hard. Like, that was uncomfortable. But those are the growth moments. Being, under pressure creates something really unexpected a lot of times. And I learn in that way. So I just knew it was the right fit for me to be, be challenged, supported, learning in a group environment, learning with the group, because I never have all the answers. I think, that's another misconception about people who write books or do what I do, is like, I'm still figuring it out, and I'm still adding to my toolkit, with and learning with others, because I'm on the same journey of inclusion. I'm still traveling my own model. So yeah, it's just really, I think that was like a key moment where I was like, oh, okay, I can do this. And Phil, what would you say? I want to ask you the same thing. Like, when did you feel like, oh, okay, this is the sweet spot when I'm in flow? Like, what are you doing when you're in flow?
Yeah. So like, I work in higher ed. I work in career services here at Georgia Mason University, and I definitely was vibing with what you said. Where I feel like, for me, I felt like I was on stage the same time when early on in grad school. Similarly, someone asked me to do presentations. I used to work at Learning Services, and they asked me to do presentations on workshops on like topics that were kind of boring, like how to study skills. And like, I still would throw jokes in there, or it was almost like a stand-up routine, like, and that feeding off the audience. And that for me, I was never a performer, but I was an athlete. I, played football, ran track. And so I had moments of being the person that eyes were on. And I still get nervous, but I get nervous like I was for a game, and I thrive off it. So like, if I'm getting engaging and they're like responding or asking questions, or I look at that one person and I say a bad joke on purpose, and I get that one person that like laughs back at me, I'm like, this is it. I got him. And I say that, like, I got him. And so I definitely, as an extrovert, wanted to hone in. I'm working on public speaking and all that stuff. But like, for me, presentations, like when I look at like what I want to do at work, I'm always volunteering. Like, who can do this presentation? Me. That's like where I want to go. Who wants to do this really long report? I'm like, not me.
That's not your gift.
No. So I really
Mine neither.
So that's where I as I've gone earlier, oral presentations. I like interviews, podcasting interviews. I like moments on stage and spotlight. Making fun of myself, not taking myself too seriously.
So
And that's
great.
when I feel like I'm in the zone.
Yeah. So important to know.
I feel energized. I legit will have a presentation. If I have like one of those early morning presentations at 10 a.m., that gives me enough juice for the rest of the day.
Yeah.
Or it gets me jacked up at night, which I probably can't do.
Because then you can't sleep.
No, I can't sleep. I'll do a presentation at night, and then I'm like, oh, it's over at 7. I'm like wired until like 10 o'clock. It gets me really
That's awesome. That's a good sign. Well, I hope people are listening to this and feel like if your life isn't in your professional life isn't aligned with those moments where you feel like, oh, I could do this all day. Like this is like not work. We have to find those. And then if we have the good fortune to build our profession around being able to do more of what we love, like not just what we have to do. We all have that, but can we really commit to honoring our genius and building the way that we make a living around that? And it can feel hard, like how do I get from here to there? But I hope these are two stories that inspire you to kind of even just start to notice where you feel like things are easy, and when you're in flow and you could do it all day, and it energizes you, doesn't fatigue you, like that. There's information in that that's so important for us. We're very lucky, Phil, that we do what we do.
All right. Well, this is the part of the show where the stage is set. This is your platform. I'll keep my mouth shut. Shout outs and plugs. So shout out, show love to anyone that you want to show love to. Call them out, whatever. And then plugs. This would be particularly ways that you want people to engage with you, whether it's a website, your social media, as well as the things that you're working on. So the stage is set. Whatever you feel like, shout outs and plugs.
Well, I can't do this work alone. So I'm so grateful for my team, and I would name all of them. But look at jenniferbrownconsulting.com and about us, and you'll see the incredible people I get to do the work with and learn from and with and alongside every day. So of so many different identities that have broadened my own journey of learning, and we trust each other with our stories, and it's very significant. So I never take that for granted. And plugs, gosh, I have a book. My latest book is called Beyond Diversity, which was out at the end of 2021. Please check it out. I co-authored it with Rohit Bhargava, and it is about going beyond diversity, meaning beyond the conversation to action. Like, what can I do? And also beyond the workplace. So it's education, government, media, all kinds of different domains that touch our lives. And the question we always come back to is like, what can I do from wherever I sit? So it's not necessarily a leadership book, but I'm hearing that a lot of leaders really like reading it. It feels very practical, and it's very like holistic. I mean, it shows that DEI is everywhere. It's occurring. It's a fact everywhere. It's a aspiration everywhere, in every discipline, in every part of life. So I would urge everybody to pick up a copy. So that's that book. The book we were talking about earlier, you and I, is How to Be an Inclusive Leader. The second edition to that is coming out in the fall of 2022. But you can still pick up the first edition. Please do. And I have a podcast called The Will to Change. And I wanted to give a shout out for that, which is a lot of what we've been talking about today. So don't miss that. And then socials, I'm at Jennifer Brown on Twitter. So pretty easy to follow and find on all the other platforms, Instagram, LinkedIn, all of it. If you want to engage with our firm on consulting services, it's jenniferbrownconsulting.com.
Excellent. Well, please, please, please take advantage of all these things. I definitely, as I said, I read the book, How to Be an Inclusive Leader, and it vibes with me because, those are things I'm always growing. I'm trying to be a leader myself. And I just like to listen and read different aspects of that and, adapt my leadership style. So I definitely rock with that. And I'm definitely going to check out your latest book as well. For Positive Filter listeners, please, if you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a family member or friend. That's how the podcast grows. If you have any questions for the podcast, you can call the podcast hotline, which is 571-336-6560. That's 571-336-6560. Sometimes I throw those voicemails at the beginning of episodes, but it's been great. Thank you, Jennifer. This has been a great episode, and I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Phil. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you for listening to Positive Filter, a podcast that focuses on family, friends, career, with a little self-help along the way. If you enjoyed this podcast, please share it with your family and friends, and like the Facebook page, Spreading Positivity of Movement. Thanks for listening.